Welcome to another episode of the Wandering Watercolor. Today we're painting the 6th page of the Ocean Life watercolor coloring book that I make. Let's get started. Okay, so this is the 6th page. It's just 3 orcas swimming together. And as always, you want to have your brush, a plate to mix your colors, a rag or paper towel works just fine. Your paint, this is my palette, any palette works. I'll have an in-depth article that I'll post in the description that I made about a ton of different types of supplies. Piece of paper, it doesn't have to be watercolor paper, just something you can kind of try out some of the colors. And on the side here, I have 2 jars of water. So let's get started. The first thing we want to do is we'll mix up the larger part of the color that's in the bodies. It's a very dark black, but if we just use straight black, it will look somewhat artificial. So with watercolors, when you're painting, just like in the last video, when you're painting something that's more organic, you want to have more involvement in the process of making or mixing the color, as opposed to just using them straight from the tube. I'm not saying that you can't do that, but if you want to make it look more organic, that's a better way to go. So I'm getting some blue here, and then I'm also actually going to get some brown. Blue and brown, I think, make the best gray. And so basically, I'm just mixing up blue and brown, and depending on how dark I can get this, you can tell that I'm not using a lot of water, just because I want it to be as dark as possible. And so this is what I'm getting right now. So you can tell that this is a really nice dark brown, kind of like a blue brown, gray, like a really nice dark gray, more on the blue side. So we'll leave that right here, and then we'll grab a little bit of it and we'll mix it up with some water. The reason being is we do want to show some dimension, and the best way to do that is to have a lighter layer and then a darker layer that shows out, like kind of like emphasizes the shadows. And since we have such a good amount mixed up, I'm adding a lot of water now to this mixture, just to show you the difference. So for example, this is the color that was just straight of, mixture, very little water. And now if we use this, you can see how it's lighter. So it's more water, less pigment. So that's what we will use for these 3 orcas here. And you can tell that I'm mixing it a lot. Part of the reason for that, especially with the darker pigment, you don't want the little particles of the pigments to show through. And so even though this is a very finely mixed paint that I'm using, it's always better if you mix it up a lot, especially since when you first pick it up, when you pick up the color off of the paint, if it's sat out for a long time, it can get a little clumpy. So this is just kind of like to break it up, make sure it's really well mixed with the water. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to start with the first one, and I'm just coloring all in the areas that you would think are like where the black or the darker part of the animal is. If you've ever seen an orca, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They're almost like a yin-yang symbol. It's just like a lot of black and some white. Although in nature, I used to have an art teacher that used to say, in nature, nothing is pure black. That's why I caution people from using just straight black whenever painting animals or anything really organic or natural. Just because if you do pay attention in nature, or I should say, there are like black rocks, for example, or different kinds of black minerals, but more in terms of living organisms, you almost never see anything that's like pure black. There's always a shade of something else in there. Okay. And you can see I'm not rushing. I'm just kind of slowly going in and excuse me, laying down the foundation here. Keep in mind, like I said, this isn't going to be the only dark color on the bodies of these animals. We are going to add a second layer, which is a shadow, once all of these dry. Okay, so we have that, and then moving on to the next one. And you can kind of tell that I'm painting right over the eyeball, which is the little circle. I usually, whenever I make these, I do several sketches just to see how they look, with different color compositions, different lighting compositions. And I decided not to paint the little black dot that would be the eye on these ones, just because if you do that, it actually looks kind of weird. If you look at orcas in the wild, any picture of an orca, you actually can't really tell where the eye is. I don't know if it's just because it's like a camouflage thing, but it actually looks better if you don't paint that little dot that's right there. Or if you want to, go ahead and maybe paint it on one of them, and you'll see how different it looks. It looks odd. That's really the best way to put it. Okay. And then covering in this one. This what I'm doing right now is considered a flat wash. I'm trying to get it just as even as possible. That way, it's kind of like a base coat. Flat washes are great for getting really the underlayer, kind of like establishing tones, and then building up on top of that. I'm just going very slowly, little by little, filling it in. Okay. So now that we have all of that in there, we can add in that second layer, which will create a shadow. And so I'm just going to get this straight from here, from the really dark mixture that we made. I'm actually going to add a little bit of water just because, just a little bit to make it more spreadable. It'll still maintain how dark it is, but having a little bit more water really helps make the color just move around more easily. Okay. And so the way that I'll do this is I'm adding a little bit here, like that. And then down here, going like this. Feel free to watch how I place the shadows if you want to before doing it. It'll kind of help. And then down here. Or you can actually place the shadows differently if you want to. You don't have to do the exact same thing that I do. And then a little bit over here on the fin. This is actually probably my favorite part of watercolor painting, whenever I add secondary and sometimes third layer of shadows, because it really kind of helps give dimension to the image. Okay, there we go. And then going down to this one. And then covering the underneath of this fin. And do one swoop like this. Going up. And the fin over here like that. And then this one I'm going to mostly cover that one, just leave a little bit on the edge there. And then back here, kind of just cover the underbelly. Now remember, at first this might look really dark, but watercolor always dries lighter. And then the third one here, I'm just gonna go a little bit at the front, and then just going back, and then just kind of do a large sweep going up and back here. And then this fin just a little bit. And then definitely the back, the one that's on the further side. And then a little bit on the top fin, like that. Okay, that's good. And then the next thing that we want to do is, this is one of the simpler ones. If you overwork this image, it will start looking weird. Mainly because orcas are very high contrasted creatures, and the more you add to it, the more it ruins kind of the appearance. I speak from experience because I did do several sketches for this one, and this is the best one that I kind of figured as far as rendering goes. Especially when you have multiples. If you're doing just one and it's kind of like in a more dynamic pose, maybe, but I just wanted to show kind of like a school of orcas swimming together. And so now what we'll do is we're gonna grab let's see, I'm gonna grab a little bit of blue. Now usually watercolor paint sets usually come with 2 sets of blue and 2 sets of green. One of them is a little more earthy, a little more toned down, and the other one is a little brighter. For this, I'm using the other blue than the one that I used for the mixing of the gray. I'm using the one that's a little more saturated. The technical term for this one is phthalo blue, but I usually stay away from technical terms. I really don't think there's need for them. Just like light blue, dark blue, green blue. I think all those work fine. And so I have that here, and I'm actually gonna mix in a lot more water because I want it to be a lot more transparent. And you'll see why in just a moment. I'm actually going to use this for the underbelly, the white part of the orcas. And it'll look a little weird at first, but once we fill in the actual surroundings, the water that's supposed to be surrounding them, it looks really natural, and you'll see what I mean. Okay. So this is what I'm going for. I want it to look like this when it's really diluted, just like a light, kind of like that. And then it's not going to be a lot. We just want to kind of like give a shade onto the white part. We still want there to be white spots. So this is what I mean. I'll go like this, just slowly. like that. And then on the underbelly a little bit, like that. And then going up here like that. And I'm gonna dry off my brush and then pick up some of that extra that's on those areas. Just kind of like that. There we go. And then same with the fin back here, or the tail I should say. And then we're just going to proceed to do the same thing with the other two. And then over here. And this one just a little bit, just a touch. And then that one. And so what that creates is, it's almost like an atmospheric shadow. If you ever go to an aquarium and you see like any of the fishes, or especially the larger ones swimming around, the light is being reflected but in a blue shade just because of all the water that they're swimming around. And now we're going to take the exact same blue, but this time we're going to add more pigment. We still want more water, but we definitely want more pigment. And I'm mixing up a lot because this is a lot of space to cover. The thing to keep in mind is it doesn't actually have to be perfectly covered, because you can be a little more expressive with watercolor, especially when you're painting water. It actually adds to the aesthetic as opposed to take away from it. And so what I mean is, so now that we have all of this color mixed in here, we're just going to go around, and you can be a little more expressive with it. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just laying it in, and then if you press down on the paper as you're laying down the color, and if you move a little faster, it'll give you these streaks, these really nice looking streaks, where you pick up the texture of the paper underneath. And it's almost like it gives it movement. And don't worry if you don't perfectly have the corners of, or the edges, I should say, where the creatures are, where the orcas are, just because even if it's not perfectly, like even if those gaps are not perfectly sealed, it still looks interesting enough with the movement of the water to where it's not, it doesn't take away from the image, is what I'm trying to say. Like for example, if I go like this, you can see that there's spots where there's gaps between the edge and the water, and that's fine. It's totally fine. And then going in like that, you'll notice that as I get away from the orcas while I'm painting, I kind of do it a little more loosely. It's almost like a vignette where you're playing around with where the focus is. Because usually if there's less detail, then people pay less attention to it. Just like in real life. Going like that. gonna rinse my brush and then step back for a moment. Okay. Yeah, I think that's perfect. It's a fairly simple image when you think about it. There's only like 3 colors, or really 2, just with the different shading. But if you overdo it, it'll look weird. So that's pretty much it for this one, and I'll leave all the info in the description. If you have a question, leave me a comment or message me, and I'll see you on the next one.